I'm Tiffany Cloud. Welcome to The Storm, and thank you for watching today on WYLN 35. According to statistics, it affects 3 to 7% of the population. Some say as many as 20% may have signs of it to a certain degree. It is one of the most common learning disabilities. The good news, there are techniques and methods to help navigate through the challenges it may bring. And there are people working diligently to raise awareness, including people right here in our community. Today, we will be discussing dyslexia, so stay tuned to The Storm, only on WYLN 35. Welcome back to The Storm. I'm talking today to Allison Dreyfus-Mazzy and Tina Marie DeLong, and they are both with Decoding Dyslexia Pennsylvania. Thank you, ladies, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
I want to start by having each of you tell your own story as to how you became exposed to dyslexia and became really advocates for dyslexia awareness and better understanding. So Allison, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, it began with my daughter, who is now in 2nd grade. But when she was in preschool, she struggled with learning her ABCs. And then in kindergarten, she couldn't wait to learn how to read, and it just never really happened for her. 1st grade came, and I could tell something was radically wrong with how she was struggling in school. And I reached out to teachers, guidance counselors, anyone that would listen, to try to help me figure out what was going on with her. And no one really could help me. And I had to Google and absorb myself in the internet and read books, and finally figured out it was dyslexia. Mm-hmm. And through this journey with her, I've just been stunned at the lack of knowledge and the lack of services, and for these kids that really, if they just got the proper interventions when they're young, could go on and be successful students.
You know, it's interesting you said that, because I'm kind of stunned myself at how little I know about it, and considering what a common disorder it actually is. When you look at the percentage of people in the United States affected by it, I'm sort of embarrassed that I don't know more about it, actually. So I'm looking forward to the education as well, and I thank you for coming on the show. Tina Marie, how about your exposure and understanding? How did that come to pass?
Well, I actually have, my husband is dyslexic and both of my children are dyslexic, though my oldest was identified in 1st grade with having a specific learning disability. 80% of children with a specific learning disability have dyslexia. Okay. But I didn't know that, so I spent several years trying to research it. And the resources that are there now for parent support weren't there when I started 9 years ago. So they would put him through programming in school, and when he made no progress, they gave him the same programming again, thinking it would make a difference, and it didn't. So after a while of watching my poor kid struggle beyond what I can even tell you, I decided to take a class on advocating, and wasn't for anybody else. It was just to figure out how to help my kiddo. Okay. And through that, we figured out a way to get him into private school through our district, because my son had only made 4 months growth between 1st grade and 5th grade.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, and then when they put him in private school for children with dyslexia, he made 3.5 years growth that year. So it's not that he can't learn, it's that the teachers are not being taught in university level how to work with this population of children. And it's 1 in 5. So it's 20% of the population. And the really difficult part is my kids are one's profound and one's severe. So they're pretty bad. They're going to get services. Mm-hmm. But there are children all across the continuum that will not get services because they're not eligible for special education. Okay. So that's a struggle.
And expand on that, this eligibility for special education.
Okay. The federal law, the IDEA, it's Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, they have 13 categories that you can be found eligible. Okay. And school districts get to decide what makes them eligible. And most of them have it about 25% or 2 years behind, 2 standard deviations, whichever way you want to look at that. And those kids get special education services. Okay. The issue is the schools in Pennsylvania aren't set up to work with children with dyslexia. We know there's a methodology called Orton-Gillingham, or actually I guess it's considered an approach called Orton-Gillingham, and that's what we know works for our children. But our school teachers aren't being taught that. So unless you have a parent who's chomping at the bit like I was, it doesn't happen. My school district is making huge moves now, but last year we had a pilot program passed within Pennsylvania, and my school district is one of the 3 school districts out of 500 that will be doing this pilot program for the next 3 years. So my school district is actually having their teachers taught, their kindergarten teachers taught how to work with kids like our kids.
Wow.
So it's baby steps.
I'm shocked. I'm really shocked to hear how far behind we are when you consider, again.
But again, we're not behind anybody else because the entire country is like this.
Is in the same situation.
Yes.
Okay. Which is just as bad.
Yes.
So when you were observing your own child, Allison, what were some of the, I know you said she was struggling, but what were some of the signs? I mean, I don't know if I should say symptoms, but what were some of the signs that you noticed?
Okay, well, for her, and every child can show different signs, but for her, she couldn't really grasp her ABCs. I remember in preschool, pre-K, having a meeting with the teacher, and she had a sheet of all of her what letters she knew and which ones she didn't know, and she didn't know the majority, and I was stunned because sometimes at home she would seem to know them, and there were so many inconsistencies. Some days she would know her A, the next day she wouldn't. And then in kindergarten, she just couldn't get the reading, and she would just be so frustrated to see her struggling trying to read. I couldn't almost even put her through it, and we would just stop. I wouldn't want to help her, and I would hope that the teacher was picking up where I left off. And actually, it was funny, when she was in kindergarten, she was bringing home these little books, and she started reading them, and she was doing really well, and she was reading them fluently. And I realized at one point, when I couldn't find the book that she wanted to read, she said, "Oh, I don't need it. I don't need to see it." She was memorizing.
She was memorizing, of course.
So she would memorize a lot of words, and if there are little pictures, it could get her through, but if there are no pictures, then she's lost. But and then really first grade was when there was a huge indicator.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I would like you to give the audience kind of Dyslexia 101, because the average person, myself included, knows that sometimes a person mixes up letters or they may mix up words, but I know it is far more complex than that, and I know there are a lot of different degrees of it. So if you could give us an education, that would be great.
Okay. Well, let's start off with dyslexia can be on a continuum. So you could have a mild or moderate or severe or profound. So some kids you'll barely see. They'll just, here or there, they'll struggle matching a sound with a symbol. Okay, that's the biggest thing our kids struggle with first. So if they see the letter A, that's just an abstract letter. That doesn't mean anything to them. So if you say, okay, what sound does that make? Or what letter is that? Or if you say the sound ah, what letter is that? They can't make that connection. That's the first place that they struggle with. And once you teach them that, it's decoding. So if I say to you, how many different ways are there to spell the sound A? Most people will say 3 to 4. There's actually 8 different ways. So think of like E-I-G-H, that says A. So our kids need to be actually taught very explicitly, so that when they come across that word, they can say, oh, I know that says A, and they can decode it. What happens in school a lot of times is schools, they focus in on fluency and comprehension. But fluency is basically decoding quickly. So if you can't decode, you can't decode quickly.
Okay.
So our parents are saying, they're having the kids read, they're having them do these different programs to help them decode quickly, but they need to back up and go back down here and teach them how to do the decoding portion of this. But some of the signs that you'll see younger is a lot of our kids have trouble sequencing. They can't rhyme. If you say fat, cat, bat, and the next one says big, that's a sign. They're not getting that concept.
I need to stop you there, Tina Marie, just because we have to go to break, but I want to pick this up after break. It's really interesting. Thank you so much. We will be right back on The Storm. Hello, Welcome back to The Storm, and we're talking about decoding dyslexia. And if you could please continue on the education you were giving us about dyslexia.
Absolutely. A little bit of what the issues are with our children is that they are usually intelligent enough that they can hide under the radar. You don't necessarily see them because they can comprehend even if they're not getting all the words. So a lot of times it kind of delays identification till they're older because they've made it through with pictures. They've made it through with context clues from the other words that they can read. So when they get to about 4th grade, that's when we really see these kids getting hit hard.
Interesting.
But what you really want to do is intervene early. And that's the biggest struggle because the way special education is set up, it's a wait and fail type of system. So they have to have this discrepancy between their intellect and what they're doing. So that's generally a 2-year gap before they actually will get this
Which
services.
is sad that you have to have this period of time to make your case that long, and meanwhile this poor child is not getting the help.
That's the opportune time to actually help them, so they never fall behind. If you would help them right in the beginning, they would never fall behind.
Oh, it's very frustrating. I'm very frustrated sitting here.
I'm very frustrated. Off of the floor after they've failed too.
Yeah,
I mean, now you're dealing with a problem with the way they learn, and then after they failed for 2 years, then you're dealing with anxiety, emotional issues,
Well, absolutely, and that self-worth, self-esteem, it's built through accomplishment. And if these children who are extremely intelligent, this is not an intelligence issue, but if they're processing the information differently and struggling with that, I mean, you could see when they're having failure in accomplishment, how that could affect their self-worth.
Yeah, I actually say quite often that with our children, you'll hear with other children sometimes that their behaviors are keeping them from learning. For us, their academic failure is causing behaviors. It's the exact opposite of what you see with some of the other eligibility categories.
And this is not just isolated to letters and words. This can also affect math?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It can?
Yes, there's dyscalculia and there's dysgraphia, which are written expression and mathematics. So these kids can be affected in so many different areas. All the different areas of academics are really hindered by these 3 areas. But dyslexia itself is the inability to read the way you would want to. And then we were talking about reversing letters. A lot of kids reverse letters before they're 7 years old, and they learn it and they move on. Not all children with dyslexia ever have reversals.
Oh, okay.
So it's not, I mean, it can be a sign, but it's not necessarily like the sign.
The sign.
Right.
One thing with my daughter too that I really noticed is her concept of some things like over and under.
Right.
She couldn't get, and understanding yesterday and tomorrow and things like that. Those were very difficult for her to grasp.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to focus on what we can do about it for the second half of the show, because you've really given us a great education in a very short period of time. But so let's say one gets this diagnosis or believes that they are moving towards this diagnosis. Knowing the resources are limited in schools, et cetera, and knowing the training isn't necessarily there, where does one go? If I'm a parent in this situation, where do I start? Where do I go?
In Pennsylvania, we're pretty lucky. We have a lot of areas have what's called the Children's Dyslexia Center, which is a charity that's done by the Masons. And you can go there, and often there's a waiting list. But if you have your paperwork showing that you have dyslexia or a specific learning disability, you can go there. It's 2 nights a week for 2 years, and generally they're rating on grade level by the time they're done, and it's free to parents. Now that is why there's a waiting list.
Sure.
So there's the Wilson program. There's a lot of Wilson tutors out in Pennsylvania. That seems to be the biggest commercial package that can help our children. Wilson, the Wilson reading system. Parents that are trying to do it on their own because they cannot afford the price of a tutor, because tutors are very, very expensive. There's a system called Barton Read and Spell, and that parents can do on their own. They watch videos and then they go work with their child, and they can work them through that system that way. A lot of homeschool parents use that. And actually, that's one thing I wanted to say is a lot of our parents are starting to homeschool them to keep them from having those meltdowns and those behaviors and those sort of things that are happening because they're just failing within the school system. Our school systems, unfortunately, are not set up. They don't have these programs in, so it's fighting. with the school district often. And there are some school districts that are really wanting to help. They just need parents to inform them.
Okay, so here's $1 million question, Allison.
Right.
How's the Hazleton area school district doing on this? And I don't mean to be critical about that, but I mean seriously, how's that going?
Well, I have to say, a year ago, it was a pretty sad situation, and we formed, just through social media, formed a little group in our area and approached the school board, and now we're getting 10 teachers certified in Wilson.
Bravo.
So yeah, and
good for you.
And I have to say, well, our whole group, just have been nonstop in putting some pressure on them to deal with
well, and
doing
again,
something.
when you talk about the percentages, I said in the intro to the show that they say 3 to 7%, but it could be as many as 20%. You use the 20% number. That's a lot of kids in the Hazleton area school district potentially struggling with some degree of this, and we certainly need our teachers educated.
Absolutely, and the teachers really want to be educated too. They want to help these kids.
Sure.
I mean, at the beginning of my situation with my daughter, I had so many teachers say, I wish I knew more, but our universities or schools just aren't teaching them.
So what have you done in the interim until they've been getting ramped up?
I found a tutor in Lewisburg, and I would pick my daughter, she was 6 years old at the time, pick her up after school, drive an hour to Lewisburg. She'd be in tutoring for about an hour and a half. A phenomenal tutor that, because my daughter's self-confidence was just shattered, and she really, really picked her up off the floor and really had her reading on pretty much grade level, and because of her, we're doing really well. We had to stop because that was exhausting, but so now we're just hoping for the school to be able to really help us out with the Wilson.
Well, I hope so, because not all parents have the ability or the resources to hire tutors, to be able to travel with, maybe their job doesn't allow them to do that. And so, I'm so glad that you have that situation, but how unfortunate that so many don't.
Yeah, and that's when we formed our group, we would all talk about that. Now we understand what's going on with our kiddos, and we want to try to help them, but what about all the kids that don't have anybody advocating for them? How sad is that?
Well, and also for you parents to have a support system with each other is important as well, because, I was talking, before we were rolling tape tonight, I was talking to you, our kids are in the same age, and we're, the homework between 4th grade and 5th grade just went up exponentially. It's hard enough for me, and I'm not having to deal with the struggles that perhaps other children are having to deal with, and I can't even imagine what it's like for you to sit down and work with your child some nights on homework.
It's really frustrating, and it's sad, because I don't think that our homework situation should be like that. I really don't,
Yeah, it's a lot of homework.
And I have to say, with our district, Dr. Butler has been great, and he's been having community outreach meetings, and that was brought up, the amount of homework.
Okay,
So,
well, I have to go to break there.
Okay.
We will be right back on The Storm. Welcome back to The Storm. Today's show, we are decoding dyslexia, and I'm talking to people from Decoding Dyslexia, Pennsylvania. I really want you to talk about what parents should do if they think or see that their kid may be struggling, they have some suspicions. What would you like parents to do?
The very first thing they should do is, in writing, ask their school to do a comprehensive educational evaluation. That will tell the school and the parent where the child is struggling. And what they do is they compare the child's cognitive ability to their academics. And when they do that, then they can find that discrepancy we were talking about earlier, so that they can get into services. Again, like I said, though, they may not be eligible for services, so they still may need to get services outside of school if they're not in that eligibility range, which means get a tutor. A lot of schools, parents want to hear the word dyslexia, which schools do not diagnose. They determine eligibility. So then you would go to a neuropsychologist to find out if they actually have dyslexia. But that is a very, very costly thing to do.
Okay, and how about social media support services for parents?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing that you can really do is reach out to other parents through social media by getting in touch with Decoding Dyslexia. If they reach out to Decoding Dyslexia, they can put you in touch with other parents in your local area that could help and support you. And that really is the best thing to do, because your school's going to listen a lot better if there are 10 of you asking for help rather than just one of you. And again, you can, like Tina Marie said earlier, why reinvent the wheel? You know, things that I've gone through a year ago, I can help somebody who's going through it right now.
Sure, absolutely. By the way, it is decodingdyslexia.org is the website if you want to go in and check out their website.
Decoding Dyslexia PA.
PA.org, I apologize. Decodingdyslexia.pa.org. And it's important they go to resources like that, and they go to social media pages like the one that you run, because there is also a lot of misinformation about there.
Yes.
And so it's important to sort of get through the muck.
Right. If they would go to Facebook, Facebook is a place where a lot of the Decoding Dyslexia, actually all the Decoding Dyslexia groups are out there across the country. But there's also the one that I run is it's Dyslexia/Specific Learning Disability Advocacy. And if you ask a question out there, you're going to have 3,700 other parents that could answer that question for you.
Okay.
And there's an amazing amount of information out there because we've already been there.
Okay. I really appreciate the education that you ladies have both provided myself. I learned a lot, and I'm embarrassed how little I know about something that is so unbelievably common, and I'm stunned and disappointed that we are not further along as a society in terms of providing these children educational resources and providing parents support services that they so need. So I really want to commend both of you on just the tremendous education you've provided and the great advocacy work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
thank you
much.
for doing it in our own school district, Allison.
Oh,
You,
thank
along
you.
with a bunch of other people. I mean, that's leadership. I always say on my show, don't complain about it, do something about it. And bravo to you, you've done
thank
something
you.
about it. So
Thank
I
you.
admire that. Thank you.
Very much.
Come back on the show anytime. Remember, folks, when you look around and don't like what you see, don't complain about it. You too can do something about it. Thank you for watching.